Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear students, I must say as well. I think this is important that we are having this at the university and a younger generation is present as well. By the way, can you hear me? Is it mic? Okay, now mic is finally on. So, my name is Rīgas Stradiņa and I am a director of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs and professor at Rīgas Stradiņa University at Political Science Department, Faculty of European Studies. And of course it's for me the great pleasure, already second year in a row, to have this European scorecard, foreign policy scorecard presentation here at the university. Because as I mentioned, that younger generation presence, I think it is very important when we speak about future of Europeans' foreign policy and sort of younger generation influence on this as well. I think that we are having here the future of the European Union's foreign policy. But this is about previous year. It's about the 2014, which was supposed to be a good year. Which was supposed to be a good year to celebrate 10th anniversary of Baltic membership of the EU and NATO, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Baltic Way, which demonstrated that how important it is to think spiritually in a sense and also to implement and to have a success stories. But at the same time, of course, we know what it was. Actually, I even found a European security strategy which was just published before we joined European Union and NATO in 2004. And it started with a phrase which I think was omnipresent feeling of that time. Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, nor so free. The violence of the first half of the 20th century has given way to a period of peace and stability unprecedented in European history. It was in 2003, so 10 years ago. 2014 has demonstrated how fragile the whole system has been. Apparently, instead of building on this allegedly unprecedented stability, we face fundamental challenges to peace, to stability, to prosperity. For the region and beyond. First of all, of course, it's about Russia's aggression, violation of international norms. It has shaken the whole security architecture in Europe and beyond. It has been a geopolitical game changer on the global chessboard, especially, of course, regionally. But it's actually not the only one. It's not just about Russia's aggression, because we can still think about economic recession in Europe. Still Greece is on the cards, as you may see, and Brexit is still being discussed. And of course stability of Eurozone, anti-European sentiment in general, and anti-European parties, populist parties, which are increasing their presence in European politics. We have heard also that in France, Mr. Marine Le Pen has also strengthened her positions in French politics. Of course, it's also about the terrorism, which was so harshly reminded of its seriousness beginning of this year. So it has been also a challenge to the Euro-Atlantic solidarity, because how we deal with all those issues, challenges and problems. And that's not an easy, because we are differently located, we have different national interests, and of course it influences how we look at things as well. We've been quite successful, but this challenge is still fundamentally very important. It has been, of course, a challenge for the Baltic countries as well. And I spoke about the good 10th anniversary, so sort of this celebrational mood, but it seems that the ghosts of the past also have been reinvoked. And it has showed how fragile environment is which surrounds us in the neighborhood as well. It has motivated us to do our homeworks. I think that's why sometimes don't waste a good crisis. We have showed also that we are able to deal with challenges outside. Actually, some would even say that we have finally become members, full-fledged members of the EU and NATO especially, with boots on the ground with solidarity being expressed here in the region. So there are some silver lining to the whole challenging environment what we face. But of course, there are still questions. Questions, how important are those challenges, what we could have done also better, what kind of homeworks we could have done better, how much depends on ourselves and how much depends on those tectonic shifts of the global chessboard. And how much we should invest in the partnerships. And I believe, of course, the partnerships are very important in many ways, but of course, what is the right balance? These are not the easy ones. Because European Union, of course, is about the partnerships. Latvian EU presidency is about partnerships and collective efforts. And European foreign policy is about collective effort. And then already I come here to this event and the scorecard, European Foreign Policy Scorecard presentation. Of course, this is the collective effort by different authors. And moving forward, I would say also this event is a collective effort. Of course, authors and our distinguished speakers. And I here, of course, would like to underline the presence of Madam Presidency, the former President of Latvia, Vairīgas Stradiņa, who I think has contributed a lot to Latvia's success story and also intellectual debate. But there are also other partners, such as European Commission representation here in Latvia, which has contributed and kept all the time this intellectual debate sustainable and alive. And also we have very good relations with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and being on the board for all our events as well, very importantly. And of course, European Council for Foreign Relations, which is a partner for this event and being represented by Kadri Leek here. So I would start with giving floor to Andris Kužnieks, who is one of the important partners of ours already, as I said, for years. And once more, thanks for supporting also this, I think, very important event, very important discussion here at the university, here not only among excellencies, but also among the younger generation. Please, Andris, the floor is yours.
Madam President, Madam Parliamentary Secretary, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, students, I am also very glad to address you today here. Actually, Andris, when I joined the European Commission office almost 3 years ago, being a representation of the Commission within the member state, we actually at the first year never faced that our priority was also EU foreign policy. But of course, and given the current times, it's also one of our communication and our political priorities. Astronomic spring has come, and as a tradition, actually, we are having this ECFR scorecard presentation. And as Andris mentioned, we have established permanent cooperation with Latvian Institute of International Affairs. And I think I should be also thankful to Andris for this cooperation that we have established, not only for this event. I believe the scorecard is the flagship publication and helps us to stimulate healthy debate on successes and flaws of the European foreign policy. And I'm also happy that this debate is taking place here in Riga today. I won't speak about the challenges the European continent is facing from east, from south, and also internally, because these issues will be addressed to you today as well by the experts. But looking back in last year's presentation, indeed, as Andris mentioned, we have been hoping for a very successful year in EU foreign policy, and a lot has changed. Probably I should mention the change also of the EU foreign policy leadership. As you know, since November 2014, there is a new commission, new high representative, and I believe this new commission has changed also principles of its work, because never before there was a team of commissioners led by High Representative who are working on EU foreign policy. Or, for example, we feel personally that whenever High Representative comes to Riga, she works on her visit together with Commission representation, which was never before actually. We're also witnessing changing public attitudes towards European Union. I just had a possibility to look closer at the latest Eurobarometer, which is the public opinion poll performed also and used by European Commission, and the latest November 14 edition shows very interesting views of Latvian citizens. For example, there is a stronger identification of the Latvian citizens with European Union. The change is plus 6 percentage points up to 63%. Or, for example, 22% of respondents associate EU with peace, and the increase since spring 2014 is 4 percentage points. The same goes with mentioning that peace among member states is one of the most important achievements of the EU, where increase is 7 percentage points. Also, you remember introduction of euro was heavily criticized, or there was a quite negative public perception. Nowadays, during 1 year time, November 2014 shows that there is over 70% of respondents who think that common currency is something good and positive. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will have, and also I will enjoy, very fruitful discussion, and with this I wish you a very successful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Andris. Thank you once more for this, again, mutually enriching and beneficial cooperation for a long time. But here I am more than happy to let it give a floor to Zanda Kalniņa-Lukaševića, who has been before in her previous position as a chairwoman of the European Affairs Committee of the Latvian Parliament, and now is parliamentary secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So actually you have almost two hats or two legs in a sense in the foreign policy. So from the legislation side and also from the implementation side as well. So please, Zanda, the floor is yours. So please give us how it looks from the Latvian foreign policy executive branch at the moment, please.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished students, dear colleagues, and President Scroots. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here today at the presentation of the European Foreign Policy Scorecard for 2015. I do look forward to discussing today what we have accomplished in the past year and where we can improve going forward. I would like to share my experience of Latvia's EU presidency up to this point, and to talk about how Latvia and the EU have scored on various points of the foreign policy agenda. The latest European Foreign Policy Scorecard reflects the shock to the international order that was delivered during Russia's attack on Ukraine. And it touched on EU solidarity and leadership. The scorecard shows Latvia as a leader in 5 areas, and we can certainly be satisfied with this performance. The score is twice as good as the last one. And there are several reasons to be satisfied. First of all, I'm particularly proud that our work on raising the profile of development assistance and humanitarian aid has been singled out. Secondly, of course, what to do to help Russia to see the light of the 21st century is not just Latvia's effort. but the work of the entire international community. And I'm pleased that we were given credit for our concern about freedom of expression in Russia and giving the EU a backbone on work that will bring Russia back into the family of nations that want to live peacefully with their neighbors. And thirdly, we can be proud and pleased that our efforts on behalf of the Eastern Partnership have been recognized in the scorecard as well. I predict that Latvia's presidency of the Council of the European Union will have a positive effect on the upcoming scorecard. But we have also improved our foreign policy making practices by planning of the presidency together with the European External Action Service, European Commission, European Parliament and other member states. Already during preparation of the presidency, we have increased our ownership in the policy-making process. And I'm glad that these efforts have been acknowledged in the European Foreign Policy Scorecard. Halfway to the finish line of our EU presidency, I believe we are doing well. We are showing our identity and ability as Europeans, and we are becoming more experienced. And more people are finding Latvia on the map. Our presidency priorities: competitiveness, digital agenda, global role of the EU, and security of the European homeland are receiving attention. Increasing the EU's competitiveness means implementing policies that will help ensure Europe's long-term growth. Working on the digital agenda means improving data security, beefing up cybersecurity, and promoting the EU's digital single market. And we need to be digitally competitive with countries like the United States and Japan. But rising the EU's profile on the global stage means we become consciously more involved in the processes shaping our world. Latvia's presidency of the Council of the European Union, we reacted to terrorist attacks in Paris, Belgium, and later in Copenhagen, and we did this already in January this year by changing our agenda in various council formulations to discuss counter-terrorism issues and internal security of the EU, so adding the fourth priority to our agenda. And by working steady in pursuit of these priorities and hitting the targets, we are delivering on our promises. Let me focus today especially on two priorities of the Latvian presidency of the Council of the European Union: global engagement and security of the EU. We are emphasizing partnership and integration and pushing the envelope where we can, knowing that a stronger and more outward-looking EU contributes to a stronger Latvia, better connected to emerging opportunities. We have focused during our presidency on Eastern partners, Central Asian partners, and EU enlargement towards Western Balkans. The comprehensive review of European neighbourhood policy is launched and will be concluded by the end of the year. But it is also fair to say that 2014 tested the EU's unity. We had to get our act together to stand up to Russia's hostile behavior, to aggression and hybrid warfare in Ukraine. The EU's two-track policy of sanctions and negotiations is the appropriate response. And we continue to press for complete implementation of the Minsk Agreement by all parties, first and foremost by Russia. And we will do what it takes to ensure that the Eastern Partnership Summit sends a positive and clear signal, despite the static and ongoing disturbances in the background. It must start to dawn upon Russia that its long-term relations with the EU, including on business and trade, will be shaped to a great extent by the developments in eastern Ukraine, not to mention what it is doing in Georgia and Moldova. Actions which cause investors' confidence to sag should be more of a worry to the Kremlin. The Russian economy had been slipping into recession even before the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. And we should remember that the domestic economic situation in Russia has done more to pull down GDP and the purchasing power of Russian citizens than any application of sanctions. But the mistakes that Russia has been making cannot alter the fact that Russia will always be an important trade partner for the EU, including Latvia. And we have to believe that in the longer term, Russia, recognizing areas where its interests align with EU interests, will see that it gains more by working together with the EU than in opposition. And this applies as much to stability and prosperity in Central Asia and in Eastern Partnership countries, as it does to business and trade with Europe. For both Russia and the EU, this is our neighborhood, not our near abroad. And it should be an area for cooperation, not for great games or buffer zones. Ladies and gentlemen, now turning to the EU and Central Asia. I would begin by mentioning our pleasure on the appointment of a new EU special representative to the region, Peter Buren. Cooperation with the countries of Central Asia covers a broad spectrum. So success will depend on our ability to produce concrete deliverables. Projects and initiatives covering regional security, education and rule of law, as well as those which build transport, interconnections and expand business-to-business contacts, will help us consolidate our long-term engagement in Central Asia. Latvia is now playing a lead role in the consortium of member states implementing one of the most significant EU programs, the border management program called Bonka 9. Preparation for the presidency motivated Latvia to be a more active donor in Central Asia, complementing common EU efforts. Latvia's voice has become not only more audible, but also more credible, while advocating specific EU initiatives in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, the flagship event for the Eastern Partnership policy during our presidency will be the 4th Eastern Partnership Summit. I would like to talk a bit in details about it. The Rīgas Summit is a timely opportunity for the EU and Eastern partners to find and establish better mechanisms for further political association and practical cooperation. The summit will take stock of progress since the Vilnius summit and will provide a preliminary assessment of the implementation of the association agreements. And the Eastern Partnership should reflect the specific charter and attitude of each partner country and their readiness to cooperate, rather than applying the same approach to all 6 countries. Our strategy has to be tailor-made and not one-size-fits-all. Latvia is organizing a number of events that will underline the importance of the Eastern Partnership, such as the Eastern Partnership Business Forum, Civil Society Forum and Media Conference. The first ever Eastern Partnership Media Conference on the 20th of May will bring together media experts from EU member states and its eastern neighbors. And we have to work on promoting media literacy and critical thinking. Also, above mentioned Business Forum will be our presidency's largest business event. Our aim is to promote business cooperation between EU and Eastern Partnership countries, as well as other countries, including in Central Asia. The theme will be cooperation across borders. And we are also engaging actively in the ASEM process. ASEM, the Asia-Europe meeting, provides a vital platform for dialogue between senior politicians, experts and civil society in Europe and Asia, promoting regional connectivity in different fields. For example, Latvia is organizing an ASEM Ministers of Education meeting on the 27th of April and ASEM's Minister of Transport meeting on the 29th of April in Riga. And these meetings will provide an opportunity to build closer links and cooperation with the countries. But now, turning to the fourth priority, defense and security, I would like to mention that also the European Council meeting in June will be dedicated to defense and security issues. The Council has now already agreed a number of measures in order to strengthen the internal security of the EU. And some of them should be implemented already by the mid of 2015. So helping to prepare for the meeting of the heads of states and governments in June. And I would like to mention that reinforced implementation of systematic checks on external border, setting up an EU internal referral unit, and also the Commission is invited to propose ways on how to fight against illicit trafficking of firearms, are very important actions. We also expect the Commission to present an updated internal security strategy in April, reviewing the ongoing actions and taking into account emerging threats. In the Council, we will deal with it as a matter of priority, striving to adopt it by mid-2015. And it should serve as a framework to secure our internal security in the future. But at the same time, Member States and European institutions are now focusing their attention also on the review of the European security strategy, the Director mentioned in its opening remarks. So we need a strategy so that the European Union can improve its ability to facilitate security and peace in neighboring countries and beyond. The old strategy from 2003 indeed is outdated. A revision is needed, and the EU should invest much more in the development of joint defense capabilities, boost its defense budgets, improve cooperation with NATO, and modernize its defense industry. The idea of creating a European army is a question that has been discussed now and then. Member States have not been able to reach a consensus on whether this would be the best way to improve Europe's security. There is no easy answer. Should we give away part of our national sovereignty and undergo further defense integration, which will eventually lead to a European army, the so-called common defense? Or do we need to increase national defense spending and continue implementing collective defense based on strong national armed forces of sovereign nations? For now, Latvia clearly considers collective defense to be the right way forward, with the EU playing a complementary role. When developing military capability projects, we should continue to increase mutual cooperation and interoperability between our national armed forces, while at the same time being sure to reinforce and strengthen the transatlantic link. EU nations have to stop further cost-cutting in national defense budgets and start implementing the commitments agreed at the NATO Wales Summit to reach 2% of GDP spending for defense by 2020. Living with the shadow of hybrid warfare threats, we cannot be complacent and should, as a matter of urgency, be creating greater civil military and interinstitutional synergies that will have added value in areas such as strategic communication, border security, and cybersecurity. At the same time, we believe the EU needs to be more proactive when it has been in international than it has been until now in international crisis management. This includes a united stance to prevent further Russian aggression in Ukraine. It is necessary for the EU and its member states, together with our transatlantic partners, to further improve strategic communication, as well as to strengthen the development of independent media throughout the region. We have to be firm and defend our values of human rights and freedom of speech. To conclude, Latvia's presidency of the Council of the EU coincides with a pivotal time in history. While Russia's bad behavior is a daily concern at the moment, but we also face broader threats from mass migration, radicalization, and terrorism, and the slugging European economy. For Latvia, the past year's events clearly revealed that our strategic choice to join the EU and NATO was the right choice. At the bedrock of values, Euro-Atlantic values and our people, their ability to unite and stand together. I thank you very much for your attention and wish a great discussion today.
Thank you to our Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for, I think, very detailed and expanded and elaborated overview on what has been done and what also should be done in the future in both accounts on what Latvia can do and also what the European Union can do. Speaking of Latvia, but actually about all Baltic countries, already this year we are among the leaders in terms of the leaders category. So I just noticed that just the 5 countries have done more than Latvia: Germany, Sweden, France, Poland, and Netherlands. If we do next year or this year what Parliamentary Secretary mentioned, I think next year absolutely we are among the top and perhaps even passing the Germany in the foreign policy activities. So as some of our politicians have underlined, we should punch above our weight in international politics, and already this year has proved that we can do it. But now I'm delighted to turn back to a distinguished panel with distinguished speakers, already to discuss and reflect also more on the previous year and to realize what our countries are acting and have acting in a wider European framework. And I am delighted, and I think we all are delighted and honored to have former President of Latvia, Rīgas Stradiņa, here joining us again already another year in a row. And it's great to have you, Madam President, again on the board, and we always value your contribution, your reflection, as you did a lot for Latvia to have those categories, because I think it's a long-term investment. It's not achievable in 1 year. You invest before and then you have results later on, and I think you did exactly great job in contributing both in having those successes this year, but also for the intellectual debate which goes on here in Latvia, but also in a wider European framework, as you are also the co-chair of the steering committee and European Council on Foreign Relations, so it's not just a national perspective, but also a European perspective. So let's start with your reflection. What it was is 2014. Has it been a game changer? What about European politics? Because I think it has been mentioned somewhere that we can be thankful to Mr. Putin for actually contributing to thinking in more active, proactive terms, and also actually converging our policies and being more in solidarity. How you look at 2014, what it has been for the Baltic countries and also for the European Union in terms of converging common foreign policy? Please, President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Dr. Sprūts has pointed out, 2004 was a very good year, and we really had high hopes that 2014, 10 years later, would be so much better. Now, opinions as to what 2014 has been like certainly differ. And it's not just a matter of looking at the glass being half full or half empty, but also the matter of the angle of vision under which you look at what has been happening in Europe. If one had the possibility to run over headlines that we saw throughout 2014 in different parts of Europe, I think that a mood of doom and gloom would be found to be prevailing. Now there again, is this an objective reflection of what actually is happening? We all know that for the press, good news is no news, and interesting news is bad news. So I must say that for the press it's been a good year, because there's been lots of bad news, and there's been a lot of interest in developments taking place, not just in Europe but elsewhere. Well, first to mention some of the elements of this doom and gloom, and I must say that the funereal black of this report somehow seems to reflect that part of the picture, but I would invite you to open up those black covers and look inside and actually look at the marks, very detailed marks that we're giving both to countries, to regions and so on, and you will see that the cover is not really reflective of the hopeful signs, as again, as Dr. Spruce pointed out. We do have hopeful signs, and that's the two parts that we have to keep in mind. Among the bad news, well, of course, foreign events outside of our borders, unexpected events have been very disturbing, and in many ways have made Europeans wake up from their sleep of complacency and self-satisfaction and conviction that they had just about all main problems had been licked and solved, and we could just roll ahead half asleep, you see, in a manner we had been accustomed to, and things would not just keep the same but get better. We have had warning signals of every possible kind. The invasion of Crimea and its records, quick annexation to Russia, was something that nobody would have believed 10 years ago or even a year ago. It was a shock. It shook up the international order, our belief in the sanctity of international treaties. It was a clear breach of every international agreement that's ever been signed by countries including the Russian Federation, not least of which the Budapest Memorandum, in which the Ukrainian government gave up its nuclear arms and became a nuclear-free zone in exchange for guarantees to its sovereignty and territorial integrity from these three great powers, being the Russian Federation, Great Britain, and the United States of America. And we have seen that one of these guarantors has actually broken this promise in a most violent and illegal way, whereas the other two have helplessly sort of heaved deep sighs and thrown up their arms in despair, but haven't truly done anything real to guarantee what they had promised to guarantee once the Ukrainians gave up the nuclear arms. And I think this internationally is a very bad precedent. It is a very worrisome precedent, because it means that when the international community approaches a country like Iran and says, we are concerned about your nuclear program, that it should become a military one, we wish you to stop this development and so forth, how can we guarantee that this country will not be attacked by some neighbor who does possess nuclear weapons and who uses them and rattles them quite visibly as a threat to doing whatever they please? At the same time, Europe in many ways has been seemed to be deteriorating in its own internal conviction, its belief in its own values. It has criticized its leaders, complained that there was a lack of leadership. The economic situation has not developed as well as one would have hoped. Britain threatens to potentially withdraw. The Greek situation is dramatic. It has envenomed the emotional tone and tenor of dialogue in Europe. What Syriza, as a new government in Greece, the tone it has adopted towards Germany is frankly not, I would say, a prime example of diplomatic nicety, especially towards a country which has, after all, really spent considerable, enormous sums of money by helping the other country. And so on it goes, so that when you add up all these headlines and concerns, the rise of right-wing parties, the events of terrorism, extremism both right and left, and not to mention ISIL or ISIS or Daesh, however you wish to call it, the creation of such a medieval state on absolutely outdated and medieval principles in the Middle East, the difficulty of Arab Spring countries to continue with their democratic development, the Europeans' apparent helplessness in front of all of this has often left the impression that Europe is going to hell in a handbasket and that everything is falling apart. Well, I think that as you will look through this report, you will see that one really should be more nuanced in one's assessment, although I must say that the prevalent mood has been very negative. Even His Holiness the Pope, in addressing the European Parliament, has seen fit to make what I consider a political statement, after all, and not that of a religious leader, in saying that Europe really had exhausted its leadership and its ability to stand for values, and he compared it to a sterile grandmother. Now, as a psycholinguist, I find oxymorons a bit awkward to accept, because if a woman has children and grandchildren, it seems to me that it's a contradiction in terms, just linguistically, to call her sterile. Also, you might say, is this not a little bit sexist? Because why is it that he did not compare Europe to a celibate, old and sterile man? After all, that would have been an equally fit metaphor. Finally, it also has a sexist undertone, in the sense that the woman's worth is only so long as she can produce children, and apart from that she's useless. Well, I would like to think that much as women past reproductive age have a certain use in society and are still human beings and still contribute to the end of their days, much as our male counterparts do, then we would like to think that Europe as well is not quite as exhausted and as useless as sometimes you like to think. Of course, if you read President Putin's declarations, I think he is even harsher in his evaluation than the Pope, because he talks about a Europe that is completely degenerate, that is dissolute, that has lost all its moral compasses, that is truly disoriented, it is aggressive. Even Sweden seems to be attacking Russia, which I found rather strange in speeches, since it seems to me that since Charles XII, nobody in Sweden has attacked anybody, but that's a different story. There are these perceptions of aggressivity. There are Europeans, high and low, who have told me directly that, well, it's all Europe's fault. Russia hasn't done anything wrong. Europe was pleased when the Soviet Union collapsed, you see, so that humiliated poor Russia, and of course they had to get nasty, you see, and invade their neighbors in return. It's a very strange logic. Somehow this sort of collective guilt that Europe assumes for not having respected. It reminds me of the rules that used to be, and I think still are, in the Gulag and in the Soviet prisons. When a new prisoner comes in, the old gangsters who were sitting there would first of all ask him, do you respect me? And then, you know, otherwise you get beaten up or otherwise mistreated. This business of respect somehow seems completely out of proportion, and people forget that this respect towards the feelings and sensitivities of the Russian Federation rather crudely and brutally completely overlooks the feelings and sensibilities of all those countries in that cordon sanitaire of neighbors around the Russian Federation, including over 40 million Ukrainians who, when they were planning to sign an association with Europe, which is a tiny, whimsy little step towards better relations with Europe and closer relations, we have people in Europe saying, well, you see, it's Europe's fault. It aggressively encroached on what is essentially Russian territory. But I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen, what about those over 40 million Ukrainians who did declare, as they did in 1919, that they wished to have their own republic? Do those 40 million not have a right to an opinion? Do they have a right to actually be also offended at having their territory attacked and being taken away from them? I find that Europeans have a lot to learn, both about history, about psychology, about geography, and about everything else. However, if we look at the scores that the professionals who looked at every country and what we've done, my conclusion as a former professor is that here is a student who has performed very unevenly. To say the least, there's a wide range of performance depending on which aspect we look at. It goes from A or A minus to C minus, and it gives a B minus to regions with Russia, which I find rather generous. I find that pretty generous, frankly. I would lower that mark, but well, we still have next year to evaluate. So I would invite you all, certainly to become acquainted with this report and its details, and I might mention that among the topics already addressed by the Parliamentary Secretary of the Latvian Foreign Ministry, the question of a common defense policy, the idea of common energy policy, the idea of various others, areas of closer cooperation among the European Union. This too has been progressing, and yes, I think we might say that in many ways President Putin's outrageous behavior internationally has forced even his warmest and closest supporters within the European Union to at least rethink their position and to reevaluate and recalibrate where they stand between the values that Russia claims to be the only moral authority in the world now, and Europe being totally decrepit and deficient in any sort of humane qualities. I think that upon reflection we should look at this again, and I can mention that in terms of common defense, I had the pleasure and the honor to participate in a group led by Javier Solana, former High Representative and also former Secretary General of NATO, where we propose a common European defense concept. Not a European army, but a common defense concept, and that report has just come out and is just convened. I think we even have a secretary who has a few copies here, any of you would like to see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. It's always a pleasure to have your reflections on many things. Well, I immediately would have a follow-up question, if I may. You mentioned that European Union, Europeans, we had to wake up from sleep of complacency. But the question is, what about the future? Are there some risks that we can be falling back again into the sleep of complacency? Is there political will, is there institutional basis in Europe which will not allow us to fall back in a sleep of complacency? Because we woke up exactly in 2014, but now already we start to speak how we can re-engage, re-accommodate with Russians.
I think the most dangerous force in the world is the force of inertia and the inability to face up to things as they happen and to evaluate them as it goes along. 2014 was an anniversary year, 100 years since the beginning of the First World War, 200 years since the Congress of Vienna. At the Salzburg seminar, this was a central topic, and the theme had been chosen to say that the participants in the Congress of Vienna, after the Napoleonic defeats, had established a peace in Europe, which is a questionable thing, frankly, a relative peace, it's put that stability in Europe, and that these were true statements. Whereas in 2014 the leaders sleepwalked into a worldwide conflict which was terribly destructive and extremely harmful. So I would say, even though I don't quite agree with the idea that 2014 was such a brilliant achievement, because after all, you know, 1848, it's not for nothing that we had revolutions everywhere in Europe, and after all, we didn't have peace and stability. There was the Russian Revolution in 1917, and just as the Second World War had started, there were all sorts of things happening in between. But I would say that we must not become sleepwalkers again. We mustn't sleepwalk into a conflict like the First World War. We mustn't sleepwalk into a conflict like the Second World War. But neither must we be completely indifferent to the fate of our neighbors and go to sleep in our own warm beds by saying, oh, well, I'm safe, you see. Nobody is attacking me, and I do not see any tanks out of my window, so therefore it's too bad for those who get attacked. I think we must not fall into that trap, because I think in a globalized world that we live in today, not only is economy linked across the globe, but so is security and the international rules that govern it. So my plea is, let us not fall asleep when we think about our security.
Thank you, Madam President. I think after your forceful remarks, at least here in the room, nobody will fall asleep, and we'll certainly consider and think on these things. Let's hope also it will be more on the European scale as well, and there will be this political leadership in also the most important countries which will be willing to move forward the European Union as a one and common in many ways. And then I'm really happy to give a floor to Kadri Leek, who is a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And Kadri, you have done also a great job in bringing those perspectives together, and also being here on the board already for the second year in a row. And so we are happy to have you. And I would immediately start with, to continue what Madam President said, to continue with this European solidarity, European ability to speak with common voice and having this political will to do it. One of the conclusions in the book was that there was a strong member state unity, paradoxically, but actually weak EU role. So the strong unity and solidarity doesn't mean that European Union is converging in sort of common foreign policy in many ways. At least this was a statement from the book. Please give your reflections and sort of also argue that I am wrong. How I interpreted it.
You probably aren't, but we will get there. Yes, it's my pleasure to be back in Riga for Scorecard presentation. And Scorecard really is an interesting product. It always gets lots of criticism for its grades and methodology, but it always also creates lots of excitement and offers us an excuse to have this European foreign policy discussion in at least, I think, half of European capitals, EU capitals. And that's a good thing in itself already. So this year, of course, was in many ways different from the previous ones, and pretty challenging methodologically, because some of our components when it comes to Russia chapter became obsolete, and some were turned completely upside down. If earlier, say in the trade component, we talked about trade liberalization and we graded positively movement towards greater liberalization, then now it was turned into sanctions component and we graded positively sanctions. The same was with visa policies. if earlier the goal was seen as moving towards greater visa liberalization on EU's terms, as we saw it, but still, then now actually visa bans are and blacklists are seen as part of policy. So that was challenging, and also EU's resources. I think, for example, EU's ability to influence things such as, say, human rights situation in Russia were close to zero this year. And we had a debate. You need to say whether EU invested maximum of its resources or not. Does it make difference whether you invest maximum of your zero resources or minimum? It doesn't. Result is still zero. So it was challenging, but that's why it is fun. You know, when you get these paradoxical questions towards the end and things when the full picture is going together, and you have these conversations with your colleagues and you try to come up with sort of solid answers to tricky questions, it is actually very, very interesting. So I like working on the scorecard. Looking back at this year, what, if anything, should Europe have done differently? That was also an important question, because especially in the first half of the year, Europe looked quite helpless when people were being killed on Maidan, and all that Europe could do was to issue those statements of concern that really became a laughing matter among Ukrainians. This was pretty embarrassing. But I tried to work on it myself, and honestly, I am not sure what realistically could have been done differently, given the personality of Yanukovych. I mean, he was a leader with no strategy. He took one day at a time and hoped the thing to go away. And that basically means that any sort of peace deal you could have tried to mediate between Yanukovych and protesters any earlier could not stick, because protesters had very strong views but lacked properly representative leaders. The so-called leaders, they knew that they represented the Maidan only up to a point, and they could not sell any hard deals to Maidan. And Yanukovych was pressured between Maidan, Europeans, Putin, his own entourage, and really he seems to have lacked a strategy. So I do not know what could you have done in that situation. And in the end, the three ministers' mission to Kiev in February last year, I think with luck it turned out to be a fairly good thing, because at least it provided some structure to what followed. Otherwise it would have been a completely uncontrolled collapse of the regime. Now it provided some structure to it, which maybe was not that unimportant, because many of the steps that actually followed were agreed between Yanukovych, the opposition leaders, and Europeans, such as the return to the old constitution, etc. But that was also partly just luck. It wasn't a pre-planned success. So we improvised, but and maybe the record wasn't that impressive. But then again, it may well be that we did our realistic best, actually. When it comes to Russia and annexation of Crimea and the start of a war in eastern Ukraine, then actually I think we could have done better. But in order to have been able to do better in March 2014, we should have had a different track record. We should have behaved differently already during the last 10-20 years, because we lacked credibility. I noticed that weekend after the fall of Yanukovych, there was a flurry of phone calls from European capitals and also I think Washington to Moscow, asking Putin not to intervene. It seems that the countries had some knowledge that there were plans to intervene, which is not surprising. I'm sure that plans to annex Crimea had been made early on, and Western special services must have been aware of that. And our calls didn't matter the least. They weren't listened to. And I think that is because Europeans had shown Russia that we don't mean it when we say Russia had got away very easily after the war in Georgia, with no lasting consequences. And in general, if you look at our track record with Russia, I wouldn't like to say that European policy has been purely opportunistic, mercantilistic and utilitarian. I think that's not the case. There have been a few countries who really have been driven by opportunistic considerations, but they are probably a minority. For many others, the sort of idealistic, if you wish, component or moral component has been there, but there have been differences in methodology. Say, Baltic States and Poland have been in favor of confronting Russia, speaking up. Germany has favored modernization via engagement, etc. So, but in this sort of mix of different policies that never amounted to a proper common policy, I think Russia just didn't realize that we mean seriously about certain moral issues when we say so. Because don't forget, Russia is always very prone to over-interpret utilitaristic motives in other countries' behavior and undervalue idealistic ones. So Russia must have thought that Europe is all about trade, and even if politicians get angry for a moment, then trade relations will settle it and everything will fall onto places. So I think that is why we were miserably unsuccessful vis-à-vis Russia same time last year. But we got our act together with sanctions. And I think we are slowly building up a new credibility because we are demonstrating that we are serious, and we show that we are willing to take some hardship ourselves in order to make our point. So I think sanctions are working, but of course there are long-term challenges and potential divisions. What is the future of sanctions? What is the clear goal of sanctions? What are they supposed to achieve? Are they going to be there long term, or are we soon done? I mean, Mogherini's Russia paper that was published in January treated sanctions as something that was there, for a short while to show that we are serious, and then it's done. Being serious is done. I don't think that's the way to go about it. And there will be other potentially divisive questions. Such as arming Ukraine, etc. So I think the EU's unity that really happened, and Andres was right, it was between member states, and Germany took the leading role here. And EU institutions were less visible, partly maybe because certain preferences of the former High Representative, then there was change of team in Brussels. I mean, there are objective reasons. But I would see that as tragic. I think it is important that there is someone who is serious and trying to build, to work on building coalitions. I personally care less whether it's a member state or someone in the institutions. Plus, don't forget that actually the Commission played an important role in putting the sanctions package together. So it wasn't like they were non-existent either. And now, running over my time a few minutes, just a few words about the Baltic States. It is true that Baltic States look good with their 5 leadership positions. The year has been rich in our topics. We have things to say about Russia, we have things to say about neighborhood. We have managed to do our small share in fixing things, especially hosting debates on Eastern neighborhood, giving refuge to some Russians, not least media organizations who want to emigrate. Latvia has been very visible here. But we also have done other things. I mean, Baltic States has been visible with aid, with our activities in Africa. So it's a good mix. But I think the challenge for us really is to transform our activist attitude to actual leadership. Because now often what Baltic states have earned their leadership positions are actually sort of activist attitudes. We are very emotional about Russia. We are very emotional about Eastern neighborhood. We have our very sort of well thought through ethical positions, but we don't yet work enough on crafting EU's policies as a whole, on developing strategy, trying to build coalition, trying to really come up with policy that would work for EU as a whole, and telling, you know, where is it all supposed to go? How and when is this conflict supposed to end? What's the good end solution? What's the intermediary solution? You know, maybe there has to be a containment phase with Russia before we can get to some cooperation phase at one point again. But you know, how do we navigate through these waters? I think there is more such longer term thinking necessary from us in the future, and we should be, you know, with our 10 years in the European Union, we should be mature enough to come up with something such.
Thank you. Thank you, Kadri. I would be tempted actually to ask you a number of questions, but I think I should keep them for the Q&A session. Otherwise, we will not go through the panelists. Andris Kasakamp, Professor Andris Kasakamp, professor at the Tartu University, and also for a long time my counterpart, my good friend, and also now Deputy Director of the Foreign Policy Institute of Estonia. Andris, if I may, Estonia always is doing better than Lithuania and Latvia. Why not this time?
I'm glad you saved me the need to raise that question myself. Indeed, Estonia has always shined, or shone as a star, and well, more part of the answer could possibly be, of course, the presidencies. Lithuania having led the presidency, and now Latvia, and Estonia's turn will only come in 2018, which corresponds with our 100th anniversary celebrations of our independence. Well, I think one of the answers why Estonia isn't standing out so much now is also thanks to Kadri in London making sure that it's a level playing field, because it's rather suspicious that we are very equal here, that we seem to get the same grades more or less. Estonia has as many leading spots as Latvia, except that we have the one slacker, which you don't have, and I think I'm responsible for that slacker, because it's an issue which is close to my heart, and I'll come to that at the end. But you must know about the methodology that the next three speakers will all be talking about their countries, and we're the people who did the input, the raw data. But in London, the council, then they kind of rejigged, or, well, when we thought some things our country was doing very well, perhaps when they put in a relative scale to the 28, it turned out to be perhaps a bit differently. So they had the big picture, and we provided sort of the nitty-gritty, which they evaluated and then tried to come out with a rounded picture. So I have a few quibbles also, which show that Estonia perhaps could have even shown a bit more than Latvia in this case, which I'll just come to. But I'll go through the 6 categories, the geographical categories, as the report is structured. And of course, most of our attention is naturally towards Russia, which is the first category. And in this case, as Kadri pointed out, all 3 Baltic states have gotten most of their plus points in this area, which is in contradistinction to how it had been previously. It's because the questions have changed. The game has changed because of Putin's actions in Ukraine. Whereas perhaps in earlier years, there would have been more points for those countries which were eagerly working on dialogue and partnership for modernization, which weren't perhaps the emphasis of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Then this time around, of course, showing a principled, strong resolve on the question of sanctions and supporting free media, etc., where all 3 countries have gotten points, has been valued by the Council in London. So thus all three countries have gotten the highest grades pertaining to Russia. And of course it's the ideological background to this whole report that one is graded for the areas where it's not our relationship to Russia as such, which is what is evaluated. It's how we are able to speak with one voice in the European Union, how we are able to promote policies that gets the European Union working in unison. That is what gets the points, and you get negative marks if you go against sort of the EU mainstream. That's where you're a slacker. But in the Russian case, we have been out ahead of many of the other countries and clearly leading, but many haven't wanted to necessarily follow where we are going. And now I'll come to my first specific quibble about the Estonian case, where Estonia, I think, unjustly is missing a plus point, where Lithuania does have one, is about diversifying gas supply from Russia, because Estonia did, last year the government did approve the purchase of the pipeline from Gazprom, so we're the second country after Lithuania to have gone ahead with unbundling, which is sort of the EU's third energy package. So I think we could have gotten a point there. Moving on to the US. Well, here all three, we all got points for something that is an axiom of our foreign policies, remains so, always has been, to ensure that the EU and the US are cooperating, particularly towards Russia. It's been central to all three of our foreign and security policies that the EU and America must be solid in the transatlantic relationship. And of course, it's no surprise that Russia does everything to possibly undermine that relationship. Moving on to the third category, which is wider Europe. Here, obviously, Estonia, as the other Baltic states, have focused on the east, not so much on the Balkans and Turkey, which is meant by wider Europe here. And here comes my second quibble, which I think is a point where Estonia, again, could have been a leader, where Latvia and Lithuania are leaders, and that is the question of bilateral aid for Eastern Partnership countries, which it seems to me that all three of us have been very enthusiastic about, and I don't think that there is any great difference in this, particularly in the EU framework. Perhaps if we were looking in the NATO framework, and we could say that the Lithuanians are supporting Ukraine with military equipment, that might give them an extra point. But we're looking at it in the EU framework. And here, of course, Estonia, just as Latvia in its presidency, has been promoting the digital agenda, e-governance, and exporting our knowledge and expertise of experience of reforms further eastwards. The fourth category, Middle East and North Africa. Here there's simply nothing much to say. We've gone along with the mainstream. We tried after the Arab Spring to also use that same model that we were doing, looking eastwards of, well, we don't have much to offer, but let's offer our experience of reforms and moving from dictatorship to democracy. That experience really wasn't much in demand in North Africa, and is less in demand today than it was a few years ago. But at least here we've had to try to show that there's some kind of trade-off, that we are always disappointed that the, say, Southern and Western Europeans aren't as interested in Eastern partner countries as we are, and how to get them to turn their attention towards the East. Well, if we don't show enough interest southwards, towards North Africa, the Mediterranean, countries which interest them, then they won't be so willing to look eastwards. Well, I've got 1 minute left and I've got 2 categories. Well, Asia, China, that's easy, nothing to say. And finally we come to multilateral issues in crisis management. And here there is much to say actually, because Estonia has gotten 2 leadership spots and 1 slacker. The leadership is the same as, I'm glad to say, Latvia and Lithuania, which Estonia has been a leader in this for many years, and I'm glad that Latvia and Lithuania are catching up in this, and that's development, and I'm purposely playing the arrogant Estonian role here, which is expected of me. The development and humanitarian aid budget was not slashed during the financial crisis in Estonia, and it's been consistently growing. Though I did notice in the report that the people in London who wrote that chapter put in brackets that they praised the Baltic States and put this little nasty remark that, however, this is tiny, which is not nice. But the other point, which I think Estonia can be exceptionally proud of, and which is singled out, is responding to the crisis in the Central African Republic, which is something that a year ago would have been quite surprising to any one of us here. And it's also, well, Estonia was the first country to respond to the French request and the first to send troops to the Central African Republic. This is something that greatly surprised Estonians as well, and it's the first external military mission which actually sparked an intensive debate amongst the Estonian public as to why we should be going there. But the reason we went there was not because of Africa, it was about Russia, naturally. In the extended sense that we're worried about the US pivot to Asia, and if the Americans are no longer in Europe as much, then who does it leave? It leaves France as the only country willing to robustly use its military force, and we had a good experience with France in Mali the year before, so naturally if they want to request our friendship and aid, then we are happy to do so. And then finally, my final remark about the slacker. And I'm not going to make an apology for Estonia because I think it deserves to be a slacker in this category, and that's change group. Well, partly it's completely understandable because oil shale is our major natural resource, and it's not particularly environmentally friendly. But it's also an attitude question, I would say, in that many Estonian politicians and Eurobarometer also shows the Estonian public is pretty skeptical about the man-made effects or the man-made reasons, a cause for climate change. And I was reminded of that final remark, I was reminded about that this very morning coming here. I was looking at my daughter's homework. She has in the 5th grade, she has a test today on environment, nature, things like that. And there was a question about climate change there, and it's very clearly written in the Estonian textbook that climate change, that some scientists think that it's man-made, but others think not. So it's trying to be objective and balanced, which if 99% of respectable scientists think that it is man-made and 1% perhaps don't, then perhaps that's not the right balance. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you. Well, thank you for your clarification on Estonia's role. And I understand that if you had received all those well-deserved extra points, you would be on the top of the Baltic list. But I understand you also keep it for 2018, for the exactly 100th anniversary of your independence and also your new presidency. But with this, I am happy to switch to our good Lithuanian colleague, Dovile Jakniūnaitė, who is Associate Professor at the Institute of International Relations and Political Science of Vilnius University. And if I may, I continue what I would use some of the arguments what actually Andres mentioned, that we all been, in a sense, activists in some fields, and it's a good thing, being proactive. And Lithuania has done a great job in diversifying gas supplies with building LNG terminal. But isn't it at the expense of Baltic solidarity, actually? Isn't it that some of those other activist activities basically have been at the expense of Baltic common position and perhaps even European common position? How do you look at this, Dovile, please?
Good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be in Riga. Sadly, I'm not as often as I would like. So thank you very much for Latvian Institute of International Affairs inviting me here. My task, I have two tasks, to reflect on the scorecard and also to comment on Lithuanian foreign policy. Yeah? And my quick reaction to Andris' question was look who started that, yes? But okay, I will come back to Lithuania and Baltic States. First, about the European Foreign Policy Scorecard. I think it's became already a very good tradition early to publish the scorecard, and as years go by, its value actually increases because we have already 5 reports, and we can also compare compare whole picture of European foreign policy and how it changes and what problems it has. And I think, as Andri mentioned, of course, you get a lot of comments on methodology, and I don't want actually to start methodological discussions, because I think it doesn't make sense a lot of sense to argue about the numbers, because it's always discussion is always not finished. But I wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, I think it's actually the people who make the experts who write this report are very reflexive and actually very fair and open about what they are doing, and they know the limitations of these kind of activities. So I think we have to acknowledge that. When I read methodology yesterday, I noticed one thing, that the methodology is written in a way that to leave justification or to explain why there are quite a lot of subjectivity there, and we're explaining it that it's political judgment. And I think it would be very useful to continue this comment, because of course all judgments, especially when you comment about any political issues, are political. I think it would be very useful for the Council to reflect on what kind of biases or implicit assumptions we have about European foreign policy, and according to which, or in regard of which, we are judging that. So, but my question for Kadri would be, do you have this kind of discussions about what kind of European foreign policy you, as an expert in Council, would like to see? It's very interesting, because I can see something implicitly, and for me it would be interesting to hear. And second comment is about comparability inside the report. I think these numbers are not very, for me personally, not very, numbers or letters are not very useful to compare issues across the issues. Because one issue which gets B+, it's totally different from another issue which gets B+, and I think if you don't read the explanation, it doesn't make sense. So I think the biggest value, it's not letters, but letters, not numbers, but letters. So please, my recommendation would be to read the interpretation, because the most interesting part was for me. And moving now to Lithuanian foreign policy, I think Andris did a very good job on describing Lithuanian situation as well. Thank you very much. Except I want to make one correction. Lithuania is not a leader, but a lagger in humanitarian aid and development policy. So we can be happy here. And I will not continue competition game. I think it's nice. I think it's nice game, but it has its limits. And so, but I will just present 3 remarks about how we see, or how we can see additionally Lithuanian foreign policy, or from inside at least. Of course, we can praise our foreign policy inside, and also externally gets a lot of praise for being this kind of assertive, consistent policy regarding what is going on in Ukraine. Last weekend, our president got an award from Ukrainians, gratitude, expression of their gratitude for very strong position about what is going on in Ukraine. So it is a lot of written, and at least inside in Lithuania, we get the message that this kind of policy is valued and appreciated. But of course, that's good side. But of course, another part of that is that Lithuanian foreign policy during 2014 became very narrow. And even though Kadri says that it's a good mix of foreign policy activities, actually I wouldn't agree. But in case in Lithuania, we have only one issue. It's issue what's going on in Ukraine and how to contain Russia. And actually, of course, it's very clear priority. It's very understandable why it is so. But also, in another sense, actually, at least when looking again from inside, this kind of discussions actually limit our world, close our world, and we lose some kind of context of what's going on in the world, both on the political elite, official level, and also on the media level. So I think it's kind of obsession, which is by itself not criticizable, of course, but limit of view kind of creates this kind of strange and biased situation, I guess. The situation where we get, at least at some point in the middle of the year, it was even impossible, for example, to express some doubts about what Ukrainian government is doing, for example, because it expresses like mistrust and some kind of implicitly supports enemy, yes. And I think it's not useful. And it would be interesting if this kind of tendency you see also in Latvia and Estonia. Another tendency to European foreign policy this year was that it became became all about security, of course. First of all, regional, territorial, energy security. It's not of course not this year, and information security. In that sense, it became very strongly part of domestic politics, or intertwined domestic politics and the discussions of that. So, and in that sense, foreign policy got very close with the people, which was not the case several years earlier, I would say. And finally, final point about Lithuanian foreign policy. It's like I have two tendencies actually. What I see going on. The first one is that during this year and also 2013, when Lithuania was in the same position as Latvia is now, actually our political elite and our people who are dealing with European matters, it became visible, and they became more aware how integrated they became in the European institutions, in the European structures. Actually, we became members of the European Union 10 years ago, and I think only now, 9-10 years after, we started to feel that our people know the corridors, couloirs of institutions. We know how the things are done, and can actually start to influence or defend national interests as well as it's told, or promote interests in European institutions. And it's, I think, very positive sign, which of course didn't happen last year, but it became visible in the last year. But there is also another tendency, which is it's not optimistic. Another is that during this kind of situation, their security is stressed, their one foreign policy goal is stressed. Actually, in a society, we starting to see bigger division where some part of population is kind of resistant towards what we call like Western values, or the way Europe is doing things. And there are a mix of attitudes. One is, of course, Euroscepticism. Another is totally different, that Europe is not doing enough, and also because of that, skepticism. And this kind of tendency also creates the situation where we start to live in two different worlds. One group of people, one part of Lithuania is kind of very clearly European, pro-European, and understand this kind of situation. Another is kind of skeptical and is not so much aware how the geopolitical situation has changed. So that's it. That's my view from Lithuania. Thank you.
Thank you, Dogo. Thank you. Thank you for this Lithuanian perspective as well. And now I'm happy to turn to Latvia. We have done a great job this year, from last year. Thank you to Kadri, absolutely, for also making level playing field as well, as Andres mentioned. We've been leaders in 5 categories, and unlike Lithuanians and Estonians, no slackers at all this year. But with one of my hats as a director of Latvian Institute International Affairs, of course, I'm absolutely happy and delightful. At the same time, as a university professor, being at the university, we all have to think critically. And here I am, a bit critical on this. And of course, turning toward to Diana Potjomkina, is it really well deserved? Because exactly this tiny development assistance, what we just have increased, which is not comparable to Estonian one, again, I have to admit. And also the energy, where we are still struggling with liberalization of energy field, especially in gas, but I believe actually we have to be slackers in terms of energy liberalization. Is it well deserved, this 5-0 as it's being almost on the same level as what Netherlands and France is not so far away from us. Diana, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. So, quite quickly, Andres, to your question. Here I have the same impression as the last year. When I was doing the Latvian assessment across 30 policy areas, I was trying to be very objective, very skeptic even, to ensure that the Latvian assessment comes out very balanced and very realistic. And neither the last year nor this year could I really find areas where Latvia would be definitely a slacker. I mean, Latvia has really been doing a good job, and I will not compete with the distinguished speakers in describing Latvian foreign policy in detail and Latvian foreign perspective in detail. This has been done perfectly, but just some small accents on what actually Latvia has been doing. Also, I guess the very presence of the foreign ministry here and the very level of the speakers at this event show that Latvia takes scorecard seriously. And Latvia takes the European Union foreign policy seriously, and the other Baltic states also take it seriously. And so now we have some sort of Olympic competition. Who is faster, hiring stronger in EU foreign affairs, and Latvia before the presidency, already several years before the presidency, has intensified this process and has started to think much broader, even in the areas where it has not been active before. So actually our plus points came on our traditional fields, traditional foreign policy fields, which is Russia, developing sanctions, supporting free press, and pushing for EU-US cooperation in Russia, where US you also see this essential transatlantic ring. It's offering bilateral assistance to Eastern Partnership countries, and still it's development aid and humanitarian aid, because what scorecard does, it measures relative increase, and Latvia has been increasing its aid. Development aid increased 9 times, and humanitarian 4 times during the last year. So on Russia, everything is clear here, and Latvia indeed took a very clear staunch position, which several years ago maybe could not be predicted, taking into account that our policy towards Russia has been quite ambivalent. Yeah, but now we not only support it, figuring out how we work with Russia, or I mean how we sanction Russia, but also in implementing the sanctions in practice. About press freedom in Russia, I would say that we could do even more. The whole European Union could be doing even more. What Latvia, the main plus points which I identified were accepting Medusa inspector to independent media outlets on Latvian soil. But in the whole European context, Latvia has been working very positively, has been raising this issue, putting it on the agenda, which is already important in itself. And Latvia continues to do that, and I hope this year we can advance on this point a little bit further. I had my reservations about gas liberalization due to some dubious voting in the parliament in spring of last year. But then, after the elections passed, we see increased willingness in the government to promote gas liberalization even further. And so it seems that the situation is changing for the best. About relations with the US, not only we cooperate on Russia daily, but also We supported the TTIP, and here in scorecard chart, and I would say we were not a leader, but we were a cheerleader. Yeah, so unlike many other EU countries, Latvia didn't have any particular strong reservations. On the eastern neighborhood, everything is more or less clear. In the Middle East and North Africa, the EU as a whole got C-, not very good job, and Latvia was also supporting the EU common endeavor, but not leading. Yeah, but what we see now is also that Latvia is taking active part in the European Neighbourhood Policy Review and says that we must keep the Mediterranean approximately the same importance as the Eastern Neighbourhood. And also this is something which has not been reflected in the report, which shows how Latvia actually has stepped up its foreign policy also in less traditional directions. The same in relations with Asia, where also we do not appear as leaders in the assessment, but we are increasingly active, and not only in Central Asia. Also Latvia during its presidency is hosting the ASEAN Transport Ministers meeting, Education Ministers meeting. We are trying to work more in that direction. We have a new embassy in India, we have opened new embassy in Arab Emirates, and even we have worked on, we have a position, and we have worked on sea disputes in South and East China Sea, which is something that many Latvians maybe know about, but Latvian government does have a position on this issue. Also, for Latvia, what is not reflected in the report, but what I've seen should have been, is that Latvia should have a rank leader on Afghanistan, which we support with virtually all instrumentary available to our foreign policy, which is troops, which is funding, which is educational initiatives, etc. Sustainable and peaceful transition in Afghanistan, and also our relations with Central Asian region are a priority per se, and are also a priority because of our closer engagement in Afghanistan and desire for broader stability in the region. And also we are not ranked as leaders on Central African Republic, but our contribution of 40 troops was perhaps the largest EU contribution if you calculate troops per capita among EU member states. And this is what Andres has already explained, the whole link between Russia, US, France, and Central African Republic. And just something for the future, I hope we'll not be repeating the Lithuanian example as Dovo said it, meaning very active preparations for the EU presidency, very active EU presidency, but then again narrowing down to our traditional priority regions and maybe not paying attention to anything else. But what I can say about Latvia is that we are becoming more mature, and we are indeed starting to look out for less traditional regions. And maybe sanctions against Russia and Russian counter-sanctions have played their role in these, because we are looking also for other export markets. And this is now one of the major priorities of our foreign service. But indeed, what I hope is not only we'll have a good year 2015, but also that we will use these new contacts and this new experience acquired thanks to preparing for the EU presidency also afterwards in the years to come.
Excellent. Thank you also for Latvian perspective. I think it's time, it's already really very belated time to open the Q&A session, because I think there are a number of questions. And please introduce yourself, and it would be great to have some exactly specific question to a specific speaker, if you may. Please, and let's have some round of questions. Yep, please. Uģis.
Uģis Libets, a journalist from Latvian Radio, also a student in this university. I have just some thoughts. In the beginning we were speaking about Baltic unity and common position. Later on it came out as a small competition. Later on we were speaking about already a race where somebody is trying to push someone aside and saying who is better, who is faster. And I have a feeling that all of our countries have three different, I don't know, attitudes or policies. Pro something, anti something, or we don't know about thing. So regarding Baltic unity in some foreign policy direction, and also in a European perspective. Can we speak more about one region or towards one direction, or mostly it's everybody to its own direction? Thank you.
Okay, great. So no, let's take a round of questions and then come back, please. Yes, please.
Well, I'm rather sick. My name is Arthur, and I'm also a student of this amazing university. And I have a question for Madam President. Let's assume that Ukraine will become the member of the European Union in the next 5-10 years. So, will it trigger the Russian aggressiveness and become even more aggressive? And if so, how in that case should the European Union react? Thank you.
Well, let's take case, please. Okay.
I also wanted to ask a question, a little following up on my neighbor here, about the view of the Baltic States cooperation with the Nordic EU member states. To what extent have there been any, in EU speak, synergies and added values in that respect? Because Baltic unity is one, but you know, coming from the Swedish perspective now, there's a lot of talk of the cooperation and the benefit of working together across the Baltic Sea. So how do you, from the different national perspectives, view the role of cooperating with Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and joining forces there in the EU on critical issues such as Ukraine or Russia? Or are there too many differences in views on what should be done with Ukraine or how Russia is behaving?
Okay, yes, some other ones? There is some couple questions, so let's have one round and then we come back. And actually I would add some questions, and if I may fulfill my duty or privilege of moderator, I will a little bit direct the traffic. And actually I will have a couple sort of how I would divide it. First of all, those questions about the Baltic and Nordic solidarity, exactly, to our three national authors, this would be the question, because exactly, can we put a plus sign on that front? Was Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, one of those countries were active, and you could get a plus also being a leader on sort of developing, promoting, facilitating Baltic or Baltic-Nordic cooperation, if there would be such a category. For Kadri, if I may, because this year I understand the first time Germany has become a leading country. Before it was France. Does it mean that 2014 from French Europe we have moved to German Europe, finally? And it's not just about economic, you can say locomotive, but finally also Germany has become full-fledged leader in terms of foreign policy direction. And Madam President, already you had one question on Ukraine, but I would still ask another one which has been left by a member of the parliament, very long one. If I would read, I think it would take the whole day, but the substance, the essence of this is, what about Russia's soft or manipulative power? What about financing different interest groups within Europe? Isn't it that also this might undermine Russia's, you can say, soft power and financial resources, undermine common position in terms of foreign policy, supporting particular political groups, supporting interest groups, actually also financing even perhaps, as Richard calls, writing think tanks in Europe? What would be the influence of this one? So let's start with you.
First of all, about the soft power, my personal estimate is that the Russian Federation has kept all the avenues and beaten paths that the Soviet Union had established. And even though it went through a series of economic crises, and definitely periods like in 2008, when in 1998 also with their fiscal serious difficulties, they have kept up their spy rings, they have kept up their agents of influence, and lately they're intensifying the information war using modern media. So I would say that Russia has not only kept the acquis which they had what they had acquired during the Soviet Union times. After all, Mr. Putin was very well trained as a KGB officer, and he made this. There was a remarkable transfer of training from his good training as a KGB officer to from the point of view of Russia, is a good president, because he looks, as some politicians in Latvia have said, he looks after the interests of his country. Well, all leaders, of course, try to do that, but certainly his population, if we are to believe the evaluations, he's quite popular. Now, I'd just like to say a word about this Baltic unity and all that sort of thing. I think we are geostrategically and historically linked. It's just simply a fact of history and a fact of geography. So obviously we have in certain areas, we have certain regional common interests and also historical common interests. But to me, it has never meant that we're joined at the hip, it's not for nothing that each country recovered its own independence and its own flag, its own anthem and its own language. We don't even have a common language in the area. So the idea that we should be like three peas in a pod, when we are in fact part of the European Union, to me, has both positive and negative aspects. Europe, yes, has regional interests. We see this about the Union for the Mediterranean. We have Scandinavian countries, long-standing many years and decades of collaboration between Scandinavian countries and certain things. We have the Visegrad countries, which more or less successfully try to answer to regional interests, and similarly in the Balkans, in spite of course, old enmities and tensions between them. I recognize the importance of regions and regional interests in Europe, but I think we always should be careful, and this is what the ECFR is all about, is to say that these are not our primary interests. The whole point of the European Union is that we should coordinate and harmonize the interests of different regions, and the solidarity Europe-wide would make all of us stronger, so that if the Baltic countries have certain interests, Spain and Portugal would not turn their backs on them. And if Lampedusa has a serious problem and the Greek islands are invaded by immigrants from North Africa, then the three Baltic countries should not turn their back on the problems of these countries, and take also a solidarity kind of approach and support them. To me, the strength of the European Union is the whole membership working together in harmony. It's hard work, but obviously we've managed so far, and I do hope that we can increasingly do it better. Your question there is along the same lines, I do believe, that the one I alluded to earlier about we shouldn't humiliate or displease Russia. This argument keeps up. It's sort of a zero-sum game kind of calculation that well, President Chirac used to always tell me that we in the Baltic countries should not pull the moustaches of the bear. You see, we shouldn't annoy it. And I said that by no means we're not pulling the bear either by the tail or by its whiskers or anything of the sort. But we do not want to be its breakfast. This is where we would like to have understanding from countries like France and others. It's all very well to live next to a bear, it's another thing to be eaten by it. The case of Ukraine, then, clearly, as I emphasized before, there are over 40 million Ukrainians, and they jolly well have to get down to finally tracing their own path. They have been walking a tightrope, sitting on the fence between the East and the West. They have been reluctant to push through reforms that were clearly needed because of internal dissension. ECFR has published a scathing report about how Ukrainian politics has been corrupted by the gas transfer money on the part of Russia, and they have used the weakness of the leadership in Ukraine to corrupt them with this gas money. But by the way, the corruptive influence of money on Western Europe is visible also in more than one place. And if just even a year or two ago I would have said the best thing that could happen in the world to ease tensions is if somebody could invent cold fusion on the kitchen table and we would have cheap energy available to us. Then curiously enough, my prayers have been answered so far that the oil price per barrel has gone down seriously, and this has had worldwide serious implications. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Kadri, on German Europe.
Thank you. But if I may, I'd actually like to start from something that Davila raised, because that is important. The nature of the debate. You mentioned that by criticizing Ukraine, people are sometimes seen as siding with Russia. And it's very, I can't say dominant, but it's there, and it's actually very disturbing, because it is not a good thing. I've actually been dissatisfied with the nature of the debate for last couple of years, ever since Putin came back to power, because earlier, it was interesting, earlier people like us would say that, you know, Russia is not moving towards democracy, all sorts of wrong things are happening in Russia, how don't you see? When Putin came back for his third term, everyone saw, and then everyone sort of became condemning of Putin. But that was a choir of condemnation that didn't really go any further. And especially here in the Baltic States, I felt really impatient. I felt that, yeah, well, of course, Putin is bad. I've been telling that to you for 10 years. Now everyone knows. What next? Let's take the debate to the next level. It's not enough to keep calling Putin names. I mean, we all know what about him, but we should ask, what motivates him? What are his vulnerabilities? Where all this is going? Where should we try to take it? So I think we should try to take the debate a little bit more in that direction, in strategic direction. And Baltic states are reasonably well placed to do that. I mean, it's not true that each of us, just by virtue of being from the Baltics, is an excellent Russia expert. It takes a little bit more than being born here. But even so, there is considerable expertise in this part of the world. And that actually also involves the Nordics. So I think Nordic-Baltic community is also a very good laboratory for discussing Russia. And you really need to think through, how can you achieve the situation where Eastern neighborhood countries will have the opportunity to decide their own futures? And how can you, in the end, reconcile Russia with that fact of life? And not many countries are looking for answers to these questions. I mean, when I look at the American debate, it's pretty bad. People who have their hearts in the right places are not necessarily very competent and very nuanced. And the ones who maybe are sort of defeatist. They come out and say, okay, no NATO for Ukraine, which I don't agree with. I mean, I'm pretty fond of principle that the countries should be able to freely choose their own alliances. And I just don't think that maintaining otherwise is even a viable position. And that's why I think Germany is a leader, because Germany's position is exactly that. I mean, they don't want to destroy Russia, they want Russia to sort of be part of Europe. But they are not ready to concede that principle either. At least that's how I understood Angela Merkel at Munich conference. She says it's a long game, but she wasn't sort of about doing a new Yalta, leaving some countries to Russia, other countries to NATO. Not at all. And I think that's why I'm impressed with Germany, and that's why I think Germany really deserves its leadership position. I'm not sure we ever had French Europe, but you could say we have German Europe. I have some worries about the future, you know, post-Merkel era, how about then? But right now, I think they are doing a good job. I mean, they might not even have always that good a strategy, but I think they are informed by the right concerns, and that works for me.
Yes, just to add, the State Secretary, German State Secretary, Mr. Ederer said that now Germany is a Chief Facilitating Officer, CFO in Europe, facilitating many things, and I think this really is very skillful. Andres, slackers or leaders on the Baltic and Baltic Nordic solidarity front?
Well, that would be an interesting project for our institute to do a scorecard of Baltic cooperation, for instance. That would be a worthwhile Nordic Baltic. We'd start with the small 3 and then we'd move to an NB8. Very few people noticed, except Latvian public broadcasting, that the Prime Minister's party in Estonia, the Reform Party's main campaign slogan and program, we just had elections last month and the Prime Minister was returned to office, was Estonia a new Nordic country. And the only person who ever asked me about this was from Latvian state broadcasting, who came to Tallinn to take an interview and took this very seriously. And I had to disappoint him that no one in Estonia is taking this idea seriously. That it's simply a nice campaign slogan, because of course the core of this Nordic business is, of course, we have the cultural and we linguistic tie with Finland, and economic connections and all that. But of course, looking at it from a Nordic point of view, as long as we are neoliberal economies and we don't subscribe to the social welfare model, then, which seems to be a core element of the Nordic identity, then that's not going to happen. Also, a key point could be, we have wonderful cooperation between, say, Baltic Council of Ministers and Nordic Prime Ministers, parliamentary assemblies amongst themselves, but the next logical step for this NB8 could be the Baltic Assembly and Nordic Assembly they don't just hold a meeting together once a year, but they become one institution. That would be the way forward. But of course, we would be interested, and the Scandinavians not in this. You want to cut me off, but I have lots to say about Baltic cooperation. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Andris. We can still continue in more informal environment. Please, Dovile, very shortly, please. I thank you.
Thank you. Baltic solidarity. I totally agree with Madam President. We have to question solidarity for what? Baltic solidarity made sense before integrating to the European Union. I think now there is no clear goal for what, so we don't have answer why it isn't, because we don't know why. And talking about Nordic-Baltic cooperation, maybe it's like two levels. There's policy and political level, at least from Lithuanian side, as I see it. On the political level, 5 years ago, our president tried to declare Lithuania a Nordic country, at least moving to choosing Nordic way. And actually, it was some kind of disappointment, because actually Nordic countries didn't understand what kind of cooperation do you want, and in what sense do you want to become Nordic countries. Because, okay, accepted model is clear, but cooperation projects were not clearly developed. And actually, at least on the level, Lithuania would like to cooperate on Eastern Partnership, and here actually priorities differ, so it's many problem. And on a policy level, as I understand, there is a clear good cooperation, especially before European Council meetings, and on this like policy coordination question, NB8 is quite successful format, as I understand. So.
Okay, excellent, thanks. Diana?
Just very quickly, I want to remember the ancient curse of "May you become arrogant," and this is exactly, my vision of the Baltic cooperation. It is important to keep up our independent messages, and we are still 3 different countries, 3 sovereign countries. But it is important not to become arrogant and not to damage other countries' initiatives just for the sake of playing independent foreign policy. And here we still have some things where we can ask, for instance, the recent letter on the soft power, contracting the Russian soft power, should it have been signed by Latvia as well, despite being a presidency country? Yeah, but I guess it's indeed a matter of more detailed discussion on case-by-case basis.
Thank you. I made the unfortunate commitment to have another round, but I think I will break it, unfortunately. I apologize, and I think I would invite those who raise the questions to please approach our distinguished speakers in informal coffee break session, if we may. So just to conclude, because the time is running out, and it also means that we can still continue it in a more informal atmosphere, and I think we of course absolutely must continue in next year. But to have a small conclusion on my side, if I still may, I think this black book must be taken seriously. Those points must be taken seriously. But at the same time, of course, I should add I think strategic debate must be even taken more seriously, what is behind those points. And at the very end, it's not about just extra points, it's about security, stability, and prosperity, what we are all willing to achieve. And that's why, once more, what Madam President said, this sleep of complacency, I think it's good, of course, that we woken up. But there is a lot of things to do, be it on political will side, be it on the home work side, be it still improving the whole societal performance. Let's not also be misled by the fact that we are on the same level as Netherlands in this book. It's very nice, but I think there is still a lot in actual and real terms to achieve and to still to be on the equal side. I think the EU presidencies have helped. I think for Lithuanian case, absolutely this, on the one hand we might say inertia, but I would use the word momentum, I guess, is still being very much used. I hope also that Latvia, in preparing for the EU presidency, has done a lot of things, also on the side of strategic thinking, and also on the practical implementation side. I believe also this momentum will be kept and will be sustainable, with some doubts, but still that it will be at least strategic thinking, that it should be sustainable, and to take advantage of our EU presidency. We see that Estonians have for 100th independence anniversary, statehood anniversary, and also for their EU presidency, ambitious plans of revising what I understand the whole European Union in many ways. At least some rumors are there. But anyway, so I think there is still a lot to do and a lot to think about. I think we must continue also next year on this, and of course to implement in real terms, not just to have points or extra points on the paper. I think we must say very many thanks to our distinguished speakers, to Madam President, thank you once more for joining us, to our distinguished speakers from the Baltic countries, and I'm not so sure the colleague is from London or from Tallinn. I'm still not certain on this, I think on both, but you are our agent of influence also in London. I think it's very important for Baltic countries to have such a very valuable agents of influence. And also thank you to Ms. Parliamentary Secretary also on providing very elaborative view on Latvian foreign policy priorities also in very practical terms. So thank you also to the audience for coming, for joining us, and for being part of this debate, which absolutely must be continued next year, but also in the process moving to the next year. So thank you so much, and we have still a formal coffee session after the formal part. Thank you.